Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. The state budget is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Rachel McDevitt from State Impact Pennsylvania. Welcome, Rachel. Governor Shapiro has a new idea for limiting emissions from power plants that warm the climate. What is his plan?
His plan is similar to a cap-and-trade program that his predecessor, Governor Tom Wolf, wanted to join with about 10 other northeastern states. But Governor Shapiro's plan is very Pennsylvania-specific. So Pennsylvania would set a cap on emissions from power plants, and then power plants would have to buy credits in order to release their emissions within Pennsylvania. So that's the basis of it. We don't know many more details of how it would work to this point.
Well, Rachel, who would determine the limit for emissions here in Pennsylvania before we have to start buying credits?
That would be determined by the Department of Environmental Protections. They would set the cap, and what would ultimately be that total amount of emissions that all power plants could emit in the state. So that would be up to the Department of Environmental Protection.
Now, the governor is calling his plan PACER, and that stands for PA, Climate Emissions Reduction. So just how does it differ from the RGGI plan that is pending in the courts right now, and why take this approach?
The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is that larger program that covers 10 northeastern states. The difference between RGGI and PACER is that PACER is Pennsylvania specific. We do not have to work with any other states to set that cap or to determine a price for those carbon credits. Governor Shapiro says that this would help make Pennsylvania like a little bit more competitive in that climate emissions reduction goals. Other states around us have set just more restrictions or higher goals in terms of reducing emissions. And so the big difference is that it's Pennsylvania specific, and that Governor Shapiro is looking for support from the legislature to pass this. Governor Tom Wolf tried to join RGGI through a regulation, but Governor Shapiro is clear that he wants this to pass through legislation in the General Assembly.
Well, if the governor's new plan applies to Pennsylvania only, just how does this idea make how is this idea more palatable than the RGGI plan, again, that's tied up in the courts anyway?
Right. So some of the arguments against RGGI, as it was winding through the legislature and the regulatory process, is that lawmakers didn't want other states to tell Pennsylvania what to do. So the argument here from Shapiro is that this will be Pennsylvania setting this cap and Pennsylvania deciding the price, Pennsylvania deciding what's best for Pennsylvania, as opposed to trying to work with other states on this.
What do environmental groups make of this plan so far, Rachel?
They're encouraged by it. They think it's good that Governor Shapiro is taking sort of a harder stance on power plant emissions and sort of owning a program that would limit emissions from power plants. But most of the groups that I have seen statements from or spoken to would rather we just join RGGI because the program is ready to go, and we could join and immediately start participating in reducing those emissions.
Now, if this plan goes through, Rachel, what's the effect expected to be on the pocketbooks of energy consumers?
So Governor Shapiro would like 70% of the revenue raised through this program to go back to consumers and ratepayers in the forms of electric bill rebates. With this and another initiative he's proposing, which would increase the amount of renewables on Pennsylvania's grid, he is estimating that the two programs together would save Pennsylvania ratepayers $252 million in 5 years. But it's not clear what this would look like on your bill, what the price would be for those credits, and how that might trickle down into the price you ultimately pay on your electric bill.
Could the governor's plan have an impact on jobs here in Pennsylvania?
He is saying it will have a positive impact on jobs. His two plans together, he says, would create more than 14,000 jobs in the state. It would make coal less competitive if coal power plants are paying to emit their planet warming emissions. Coal is one of our dirtier sources of power. And so it would be more expensive for coal-fired power plants to operate under a system like PACER. And so it could cost coal jobs in the long run, but he's saying that may be made up with clean energy goals or clean energy jobs.
So what's the reaction from lawmakers so far to this alternative to the RGGI plan?
Republican lawmakers who have long opposed joining RGGI are not really any happier with this. They say the only way that Pennsylvania would stay competitive with other states that we share an electric grid with is if that entire electric grid instituted a cap and trade program. So we belong to what's called PJM, and we share that electric grid with states like Ohio and West Virginia and Kentucky, which still have a lot of coal-fired power. And so to remain competitive with those states selling electricity to the grid, they would want us to share a program with those states.
Last question, Rachel. What kinds of goals are expressed in this plan that would determine how much energy in Pennsylvania comes from renewable sources?
So that's part two of the governor's energy plan that he calls PRESS. And so he would like us to get 35% of our power from clean energy sources by the year 2035. And so clean includes a number of sources like solar and wind, but also methane gas from landfills and coal mines, which would otherwise be directly released into the atmosphere. So that all counts under the 35%.
Thank you, Rachel McDevitt from State Impact PA. More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Representative Seth Grove, Minority Chair of the PA House Appropriations Committee, and Representative Jordan Harris, Majority Chair of the PA House Appropriations Committee. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. After Governor Shapiro made his budget proposal, how did the work start for the House Appropriations Committee? Representative Harris.
Well, right after the governor gave his budget address, I think maybe like a week or so later, we started 3 weeks of budget hearings where we brought before the House Appropriations Committee secretaries or department heads from different departments, as well as different agency heads, to come before both Democrat and Republicans on the House Appropriations Committee for us to be able to question them on what's in the governor's budget for their department. So I think we did about 23 different agencies. So from Department of Education to Department of Transportation to Department of Human Services to Department of Corrections. This year, we even sat with the judiciary and had the Chief Justice and other justices come before the committee to talk about resources and what their spending plan looks like for the upcoming year.
Representative Grove, how about you? What's the value of having these hearings for you?
Well, number one, it's a good time to get into both policy and budget with state agencies because money drives policy and policy drives money. Every policy requires some kind of funding to make sure it's accomplished. That's why the budget's the most important policy document the General Assembly completes on an annual basis. You cannot deliver programs without the finances. And obviously there's policy, whether it's a statutory requirement, federal requirement, something administratively done that requires us to spend that money. So it's important we do a deep dive into state agency budgets, see how they're operating, see how they're spending money, take a look at the governor's proposed plan, how his new initiatives want to work, and then how everything's funded, right? So you need to make sure you have matching funds, matching resources for those outlays of expenditures for this year and into the future. So it's an important time. It's a lot of legwork. It is, while the rest of the General Assembly is back in their districts working on local issues and stuff, a select small cadre of representatives are hard at work for 3 weeks straight doing the deep dive into agency budgets. So it's imperative we bring that transparency and oversight, which is part of our constitutional mission, to state agencies to make sure they're properly executing the laws and basically the budget of the Commonwealth.
I want to remind our viewers you can call us or text us. I'm going to give you the phone number first, 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us 717 219-4001. And we have the majority and minority chairs of the Appropriations Committee, and we're going to talk about the governor's budget proposal. Now, before we dig into the governor's budget proposal, let's consider what I'm going to call Budgeting 101, just to give our viewers some ideas of how things work in Harrisburg. Now, here in Pennsylvania, we have a general fund, we have a surplus, and there's a rainy day fund. So what's the purpose of each? And so let's consider the general fund first. Representative Harris.
Yeah, so basically, just like your budget at home, in a sense, you have your income, and that's, whatever your salary is, and then you have your expenses. So for us, as at the state level, we have the same thing. Our income is derived from several pots, on personal income tax, business tax, and a few other taxes that drive what we call revenue, right? And then our expenses on the other side, the money going out, is all of the money that's necessary to fund the government, and that's paying all of the staff for all of the different agencies and departments that our state government has. And that's the expenses side. So we have, just like the regular citizen, we have income, which is typically derived from a various amount of taxes, and then we have our expenses, which is what we're paying to operate the state government. So that and all of that money goes into our general fund. That's like our operating budget account. What money we have at the end of the year that's not spent, that we project we're not going to spend, that's called a surplus, because it's more money coming in than we actually have going out.
How much does the surplus vary from year to year, Representative Harris?
It depends, because what folks have to understand is that when we do budgets, these are projections. These are forecasts of what we believe we're going to get in and what we believe we're going to spend. And sometimes those things are actually different. But at the end of the year, the surplus may deviate a little bit. And then you have the other fund, which we call the rainy day fund. Seth, I can't even remember it's the stabilization.
The budget stabilization fund.
Yeah, the budget stabilization fund, emergency fund. That's called the rainy day fund. Think of it like your personal savings account. That's the money that you put into a savings account, and every year a certain part of what we have left by law, we put into that savings account, and that money stays there in case there is a catastrophe or some type of emergency that the state government has that we need to fund.
Representative Grove, how often does state government have to dip into the rainy day fund?
It is legislative statutory restricted to emergency use. So the last time we used it was during the Great Recession. Governor Rendell used the majority of it in one budget. I think there was $400 million left in the next budget. So the 2000, I think it was this 8-9 or 9-10 budget, and really that eviscerated the rainy day fund up until up until COVID, when we got billions of federal dollars that supplanted state dollars, and our revenues went bonkers because inflation went crazy. So we had huge sales tax and corporate profits or revenue increases from profits and from individuals buying stuff, combined with inflation, because inflation increases the price of goods and services. So sales tax went bonkers. And that's how we were able to build up such a large budget surplus and so much money in the rainy day funds. Now, under Republican stewardship, we fought to put as much money as we could in the rainy day fund. It's up over $6 billion. The surplus is around $6 billion. And it's not like we have recurring revenue that brings in additional surplus. It is one-time dollars that are sitting in those two accounts. Once they're depleted, they're gone. There's no strategy to rebuild them within the governor's proposed budget. So our main goal is to protect those finite dollars and use them as wisely as possible. What we don't want to see is using one-time funds on recurring expenses, creating a massive budget deficit in the out year. That very much worries many individuals, including credit rating agencies. So we need to be good good stewards of taxpayer dollars and understand if we want to spend on recurring expenses, we need to make sure we match that with recurring revenues and use one-time payments for that one-time amount of dollars we have in the surplus. And then do not use the rainy day fund until we actually have an emergency. That's critically important.
I think it also should be noted that under the Wolf administration, we saw historic investments in the rainy day fund. I think under the Wolf administration and continued on into the Shapiro administration, we see that our credit rating has gotten better. And here's why that's important to the people of Pennsylvania. Just like your own personal credit score. If you have an 800 credit score, when you go out and borrow money, you get a cheaper interest rate. When you go out and buy a car, you get a cheaper interest rate because you have good credit. Well, the same thing happens with the state government. When your state government has a good credit score like it has under the Wolf and Shapiro administration, when we go out and borrow money, when we do bond deals to make significant investments in Pennsylvania, we get a better rating. That better rating and that better interest rate means that we get to save the taxpayers sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of those bonds. So I think it's important to know that because of the Wolf administration and continued on through the Shapiro administration, not only do we have a surplus, not only do we have a rainy day fund, but the state of Pennsylvania actually has really good credit.
Well, I got to push back on that a little bit. The Shapiro administration credit rating downgrade is actually a predication of the last Wolf budget that was done with Republican majorities. That was not done because of a budget that the Shapiro administration put in place. He would reap the benefits of prior good fiscal policy practices. And it was Republicans that did fight in the General Assembly, both House Republicans and Senate Republicans, to make sure we have a rainy day fund and build that up. Governor Wolf never proposed to put mass amount, but did take credit for it and did realize it's a good financially for the Commonwealth, both for liquidity of the general fund. Right now, without the $6 billion in surplus we have, the Treasury would be making loan payments into the general fund just to make payments on Medicaid and other critical spending plans. So there's a lot of good reasons to maintain large amounts of surplus and rainy day fund. It's good financially for the Commonwealth. As Chairman Harris mentioned, it's excellent for our credit ratings, and our credit rating agencies have said if we continue to dwindle that or try to use one-time funds for a lot of education dollars because of the court case, they will come back and bang us and reduce our credit rating, which I don't think any of us want to do. So we have to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We need to make sure we make the right investments on behalf of the citizens. Education is key. It's always been a prominent issue in the General Assembly. It was prominent last year's budget. It's going to be prominent in this year's budget. Protecting the most vulnerable, making sure state agencies have resources to do their jobs, et cetera. But it's finite dollars. And again, the most important thing we can do is make sure we use recurring revenue for recurring expenses and do not do deficit spending. We cannot be DC. We even don't have the option of printing our own money. Once that finite budget surplus is gone, it is gone. There's nothing that is going to have that return outside of massive reductions in spending or massive increases in taxes to fill that void.
All right, let's move on, gentlemen. Representative Harris, you heard Representative Grove use the R word several times. Revenue is important, of course, to any budget. So given the present situation and the 2024-25 budget being around the corner, of course, Governor Shapiro has proposed a plan for that. What is the status of revenue collection right now? How do the state's coffers look?
So we're doing well currently, and the next few months will be important because that's when we have some of our higher collection months. But I think folks need to understand, and this is a question that I asked our budget secretary. And I want folks to understand this. When we do budgets, they are forecasts. They are they're educated predictions based off of trends and what we believe it's going to happen. The Shapiro administration is very conservative in what they believe will collect. And therefore, what we've seen is many times we collect more revenue than we anticipated collecting. So right now we're stable. We're collecting revenue. Every 1 month is down sometimes and up, but it's really based on a lot of it. Also is based off of when businesses actually pay their taxes and whatnot. So there are some months which are lower, and then there are some months which when we actually expect more revenue. But currently, we're doing well with our financial outlook.
How does it look to you, Representative Grove? Anything to add?
Right now, we are meeting revenue estimates. I think we're up maybe $70 million, which in a $45 billion budget, we're on track to reach that. As Chairman Harris mentioned, we have big revenue months coming up with income tax and business tax payments coming up. We are seeing some weakening in sales tax. Some other areas, the realty transfer tax, basically when you buy a house, has been really significantly hurt in the beginning of the year. It's rebounded a little bit. At one point in the first, I think, 3 quarters of this fiscal year, our 2 main revenue sources that were growing was actually inheritance tax. So unfortunately, people passing away and us collecting money on their inheritance. And then treasury payments. So the budget surplus that we have is making high interest rates. That is a revenue source that's clipping along $400 or $500 million annually. So it's been a terrific bonus for us. But it's something we got to continue to watch and monitor. The weakening of the economy. We have inflation's back up. It's unknown what the Fed is going to do on rates. They wanted to cut rates 3 times this year. They've walked that back to maybe 2. If inflation continues to rise, I don't see the Fed actually reducing any interest rates in the foreseeable future. So there's a lot of economic uncertainty ahead of us. We're up for a presidential election. That adds more uncertainty. So it's a good time to kind of take a step back and manage those expectations properly. But we are on track for revenues. There is weakening. And then obviously the federal government actually provides about I think between $45 and $50 billion of money to the state and numerous programs, mostly our Medicaid payments and stuff. So the uncertainty of the feds getting a budget done, continuing resolutions, it's one of our greatest financial risks is actually the federal government, and the fact that they're paying out more in debt payments now than the DOD budget. So there's some big worry with that.
Gentlemen, one more question before we get into the governor's budget proposal. Always at budget time, we hear the phrase structural deficit. And I have a hunch by the end of this program, one of you will have used that phrase at least one time. So let's shed some light on it. And Representative Harris, explain to us in simple terms, when you say structural deficit, what are you talking about?
Well, that's basically when you are spending more than you are bringing in, but particularly when you're spending more than you're bringing in things that are necessary payments. And I think that's what folks need to understand. Just like you have to pay your gas bill, your electric bill, your water bill, the state has fixed costs as well that we have to pay, that we are contractually obligated to pay. And when those dollars exceed what we're bringing in, that's what we call a structural deficit. I think I want to, one of the things that I do want to point out is that for years, Democrats have talked about structural deficits when my Republican colleagues control both the House and the Senate. And, there was no issue then in actually addressing the structural deficit. Now that Democrats control the House with a governor, now we hear folks talking about structural deficits all the time. Do we have a concern that we have to be mindful of? I think the answer is we have to keep our eyes open. But I think you're seeing that not just at the state level, you're seeing that at local government levels. But because of, like I said before, the Wolf administration and now the Shapiro administration, we've been keeping our eye on the finances of the Commonwealth. I think the other thing that you have to also think about when you have these conversations are the necessary investments. And there are some investments that have to be made in order to grow your budget. And for me, one of those necessary investments is in public education. We have a court ruling from the Commonwealth Court that says that how we fund education in the Commonwealth is unconstitutional. And because of that, we have a mandate, a order from the Commonwealth Court to fix that. And because it wasn't appealed, it is now the law of the land that we are unconstitutional how we fund education, and therefore we have to fix it. And what we know is that those real investments that we could make in education will pay us dividends in the future. Okay. Businesses come to states where there's a good tax climate, but also they come to states where they know they have a workforce to do the work that they do. So if we want to attract more businesses to the state of Pennsylvania, be a business friendly state, a big part of that is fixing our educational system and ensuring that the businesses that come have the workforces that they need.
Representative Harris, certainly we'll talk more about education later on, but for now, let's take a step back in our discussion about the budget and just jump into his proposal with both feet. The governor is proposing to increase spending by 7%. How is he able to justify that, or you as the majority caucus?
Well, I think, like I said, there are significant investments that are needed. And I think what you see in the governor's budget address is him addressing some places that have been historically deprived of the resources that are necessary. You can't starve a system and then criticize the same system for not meeting the goals and the expectations that you have of that system. And I think what the governor is trying to do is right the wrongs of the past. And a great deal of his investments in his budget address is doing exactly that, righting the wrongs of the past. I think the second way you can talk about what the governor is trying to do as far as investments is he's trying to invest in things that we know have a financial benefit and a financial return. For example, the governor put in his budget having shovel-ready projects and us investing in shovel-ready projects. Well, we know that when those projects happen, people are put to work. People, when they put to work, that's income tax. When people are put to work, they spend that money. That's sales tax. So we're actually investing in things that we know will come back 2, 3, 4 times on the dollars that we invest in. So, that's what the governor's budget is looking to do. In addition to that, I think the governor said it this way: if we invested every single dollar that he's proposed in his budget, we'd still have over $11 billion in a surplus, and we'd still be able to transfer about $1 billion and some change into the rainy day fund.
Representative Harris and viewers at home, if you think Representative Grove is being quiet for the last several minutes, the fact is that we lost him on Zoom, but we're trying to get him back. So in the meantime, Representative Harris, we're going to have to put more burden of the program on your shoulders, I'm afraid.
We got to invest more in broadband in York County. That's what we need to do.
Well, there you are. Now let's get back to education then. And you pointed out that a court ruling really set the stage for legislators. It said that Pennsylvania had been funding the education system in an unconstitutional manner. But it didn't include any remedy or recommendations, did it?
Well, so no, and the court typically doesn't in these type of situations. What the judge at the Commonwealth Court, Judge Jubileer, said was that the way and how we fund public education in Pennsylvania is unconstitutional. If you actually read the order, I mean, she was very direct in saying basically students who are in wealthy areas are going to get a better education than students who are in an area that is not as affluent. And she was very direct in her fact of making these statements. And again, I want folks to understand because there was no appeal, that means that everybody, Democrat, Republican, Green Party, Libertarian, nobody appealed. That means that we all agreed with her assessment of the system. And therefore, we have to fix that. So the Basic Education Funding Commission, which happens every so often, met over the course of time, and they passed a report, and that report basically outlines what we believe is a way to get into constitutionality. I've said this word before. I don't know if it's a real word, but it's a word I'm using. Into constitutionality over the next 7 years. And the first step in that is the $1.1 billion investment that the governor has in his budget address. About $900 million out of that 1.1 billion goes to what we call in his address, in his budget, goes to what we call adequacy funding. And that is going directly to those schools that we know have been underfunded, that we know are a part of the court ruling, and trying to put the resources where we know they need to go. The other $200 million is going into just the regular basic education funding formula that goes out to all 500 of our school districts. So, we have a response, and I want folks to understand this. This is extremely important because folks act like it's an option to respond to the court. Anybody that talks about law and order, anybody that talks about government and all that other stuff, well, we have a court order that we have to address. And here's the other thing. I think you need to understand this. If we don't address it, the petitioners could go back to court, and then the justice system, the court system, could mandate their own remedy. If you remember back, you were here. You remember back when we had an issue with our maps, and the legislature couldn't get itself together with maps. Well, what did the court do? The court drew its own maps. So if we do not address this as the legislature, we will leave the court system no other option but to remedy this situation themselves.
Well, Representative Harris, let's go back to what you're saying about the Basic Education Funding Commission's report. And you said you want to make sure that the funding goes to the schools that need it the most. So, does a list exist of the schools that are high priority and should get more funding?
Yeah, so there are, when you look at what we did with level up funding and what some of the other, for lack of a better term, Band-Aids, things that we did that we knew was necessary at the time, but wasn't necessarily a long-time fix. We had the schools that we knew were underfunded based off of one, their ability to fund at the local level and what we should be doing for them at the state level. So when you look at this adequacy bucket of resources, that money is going to be pushed out, yes, to those schools. And here's the thing, what we have to look at is understand that this is righting the wrongs of our past. For far too long, we had a flawed funding system, and many folks knew it, but didn't have the political will to fix it. And it continued, and it continued, and it continued. And what you saw were school districts across this Commonwealth, and I want to be clear, urban and rural school districts. I was out in the middle of Pennsylvania last year and seeing some of the same issues in a rural district that I saw in an urban district, right? These schools and these school districts were not receiving the funding that they should be receiving from the state level. And let me explain why this is important real quick. When the state doesn't provide the resources necessary at the state level, what you see is school districts and local governments are forced to make up the resources themselves. So you see higher property taxes, you see higher school taxes at the local level because the state is not doing its job. This is to fix that problem.
Representative Jordan Harris, we're going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at program notes for here on PCN. On Wednesday, On the Issues has more candidates for you from next month's primary election. Rob McCurry, a Republican running for Congress in District 17, airs at 7 p.m. Then we shift our attention to two Democrats running for state attorney general. Keir Bradford Gray is at 7:30 p.m. Then Jack Stolzheimer is at 8 p.m. Then we move over to the race for treasurer. Democrat Erin McClellan tells us about her campaign at 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Coverage of the 2024 PIAA Basketball Championships starts up on Thursday, March 21st, and goes through Saturday, March 23rd. That'll come to you live on PCN from the Giant Center in Hershey, starting on Thursday at 12 p.m. PCN celebrates Women's History Month with stories of women who have shaped the history of Pennsylvania. Watch on cable or stream with PCN Select this month, every Sunday at 8 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is the 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. All right, Representative Jordan Harris. Earlier we had Representative Seth Grove with us, and we're trying to get him back. He was on Zoom as well, so we regret we're not able to include his half of the whole discussion. Representative Harris, we're going to move on.
It's okay. He agrees with everything I'm saying. It's okay. Don't worry.
You see, that's what I was afraid of, that you'd take control of the show. Let's move on to higher education, Representative Harris, and consider what was learned during the appropriations hearings about this proposed merger of the state-owned schools and community colleges.
Yeah, so the governor has a bold plan to create a system of higher education that partners our community colleges and our state-related institutions. I think anybody that knows me knows I'm a proud graduate of Millersville University. Actually, the majority chair over in the Senate, my colleague Scott Martin, is also a proud graduate of Millersville University. Both were state system grads. And what the governor is trying to do is merge these two systems in a way where they now work better together. Far too often, young people are graduating from our community college systems, and in some instances, they're finding that it is difficult to transfer their credits from the community college to a state system institution. In addition to that, we see that there are places throughout the Commonwealth where you do not have either a community college or a state system institution in the area. So if we're going to retool our workforce, if we're going to get folks the credentials that are necessary to create a workforce that businesses want to come to the state, the governor's proposal is, putting together this system. What we learned is that, look, it's a blueprint, and that there's still a lot of work to be done to get to the finish line.
Representative Harris, some lawmakers were frustrated at the lack of detail about this plan.
Well, so here's a funny thing. If the governor comes to you with a plan and everything is together and there's no input from the legislature complains that they didn't have an opportunity to be involved in the process. So now that the governor comes to you with an idea and says, let's work together on the plan, now people are complaining that there's not enough detail. Listen, what I think.
So you're in a position to provide some of the detail and work the plan out and expand it, right?
Well, that's the point. And I think it's an awesome opportunity for us to bring all of our minds together so that we can work on this collaboratively.
And also, speaking of plans for higher education, he also mentioned a plan to limit tuition at the state-owned schools. Was that explored at the hearing? And let's anticipate what you're going to say here, and perhaps you're able to, in your mind, flesh out some details that you'd like to see happen if that plan goes through, to limit tuition at state-owned schools.
I think it's extremely important. We have to deal with the cost of higher education here in the Commonwealth. It makes higher education unobtainable for far too many students. Many of our young people are graduating with mortgage-sized debt when they graduate from our institutions. So what the governor said is that he wanted to get tuition down to $1,000 if a family made under $70,000. He likes to say the cost of an iPhone, and we agree with that. There are still more details that we have to work through to actually get to that perspective. But the truth is, I think everybody, and not just in Pennsylvania, but everybody across the country agrees that we're not that higher education is unobtainable for some. The debt load that you have to get to go to school is unbearable, and that we as a Commonwealth and as a country, we have a responsibility to do something.
Representative Harris, let's move on to the corrections part of the state budget. And after all, that is a large part of the budget. And Governor Shapiro has budgeted $74 million more than what was requested. So that struck me as unusual. How often does that happen?
Well, it doesn't happen often. I mean, we've been doing a significantly good job with the Department of Correction with reducing the number of folks who are in our carceral system through many different things, by working on our recidivism rate, by working on diversionary programs, and doing so while keeping the states safe. But just like there are rising costs everywhere else, I think there are rising costs in our criminal justice system. I think you also have to look at the cost of people. We have to be competitive with what we pay our staff and the criminal justice apparatus, the DOC. We have to be competitive so that we can hire folks who do a very important job keeping our community safe. And
I understand, Representative, that the cost of overtime in corrections can be substantial. Tell us about that.
Well, it can be substantial when you have a lack of staff and you have a staffing shortfall. So a lot of those resources are going so that we can make sure we have the necessary staff. And understand something: when we talk about the necessary staff inside of our prison system, that is a major safety issue as well. We want all of our correctional officers to be able to go home to their families at the end of the day.
Is there any way, Representative, that the pool of corrections officers can be expanded? Like, for example, there's a minimum age, I think, you can become a corrections officer. Any changes at all, maybe lowering that minimum age?
I think the Secretary of Corrections is looking at all options on how we can increase the staff in the Department of Corrections. I think one of the things that we that is not in our favor is just the location of some of our prisons. Many of our prisons are in some of our most rural areas. In fact, in many of those areas, it's the prison that's the leading employer in those areas. So it's not like you have a lot of our prisons around our population centers. So a lot of times what you see is that those prisons are in rural areas, and it's just hard for folks to get there. So, that is something that just is a constant issue with regards to staffing.
Now, during his budget proposal, Governor Shapiro has called once again for the legalization of recreational marijuana. And that comes back to a revenue potential. And of course, that would be part of the budget as well. So what kind of potential is there for revenue earning? And are you in favor of legalizing it anyway?
I've always been in favor of the legalization of adult use cannabis since I've been a member of the legislature. I think we should legalize cannabis in Pennsylvania. I think we should tax it. I think we should regulate it. But I also think other things with regards to it. If we're going to do it, we also have to be clear that we clear up the criminal records of those who have been affected
Mhm.
by the criminal justice system with regards to it. You have to, you can't continue or now legalize a substance that continues to hold somebody back from getting a job,
Mhm.
from selling it or using it when we considered it illegal. So for me, any effort to legalize adult use cannabis has to be partnered with a type of criminal justice reform. In addition to that, I think we also have to be cognizant of the diversification of our licensing. If we're going to license folks to grow and sell cannabis for adult use outside of our medicinal system, we have to make sure that those affected have an opportunity to participate in the business end of this. We have to make sure that diverse groups of folks would also be able to benefit from the business aspect of this. This cannot be a situation where we legalize it and big business comes in and they're able to control the market. We have to make sure that we're making room and making space for diverse businesses and diverse folks to own, operate, and sell cannabis if we're going to legalize it for adult consumption. I think we should. Let me say this real quick. I think we should, though, because we are falling far behind the states that are surrounding us that are already doing it. People are crossing state lines to go and get cannabis in other states when we should be retaining those resources right here.
Last question, Representative Harris. As far as the budget hearings were concerned, which hearing had the most on the line and raised the most serious questions for you? Try to tell us in just a couple minutes.
I don't think I could actually pin that down to one. What I will say is there are many of them. I think if you're a parent of a young person in our school systems, the education hearing was very important. But also seeing what happened in Philadelphia with our state police, having the state police in front of us literally days after the incident in Philadelphia was also very important. If you have a person that you love that gets services through the Department of Human Services, that was also very important. I think all of these departments are extremely important and play a vital role in the success of the Commonwealth. I encourage anybody who did not, know that the hearings were going on to go back. You can go to houseappropriations.com, and I think we have all of the hearings loaded up there. I think it's important for folks to listen to what the folks who are running these departments are saying about what they plan to do with taxpayer resources. It's tedious, it's long, it goes on for a while, but I think it's extremely important for those among us, for all of our constituents and all of our citizens, to know what their government is doing.
Our guests have been Representative Seth Grove. Apologies we couldn't get him back for a Zoom session with Representative Harris. And Representative Jordan Harris has been taking up more than his share of the program. Thank you very much. PCN's Ellen Frantz talked to Representative Bob Merski about political campaigns using artificial intelligence.
Representative Bob Merski, you are part of a group proposing House Bill 2079 that would make fraudulent AI representation of a candidate illegal. How did this proposal come about?
This proposal came about in large part due to the surge in artificial intelligence and the technology that's available. And we saw a lot of the deep fakes that are out there. And so Rep. Khan, myself, Rep. Paelli, a bunch of us, we've assembled an ad hoc group to deal with artificial intelligence. And this was one of the proposals that came out of it. This was Rep. Khan's idea to make it illegal in the election code to disseminate information that is deceiving using artificial intelligence.
A recent incident occurred in New Hampshire in which an AI recording of President Joe Biden's voice was calling voters, telling them not to vote. What would have happened had that not been caught and determined to be fake?
That is one of the scariest things, and this is why this bill is so timely. What you're having right now is the ability for people who aren't necessarily technologically savvy, but they have the ability to use artificial intelligence for nefarious purposes, such as deceiving people, telling them in another person's voice, like the president, not to vote or to vote for a certain candidate. Imagine artificial intelligence being used to say horrific things about somebody in a candidate's voice and then turning public perception against that candidate for the sole purpose of manipulating an election. These are the types of things that we're trying to make criminal in the election code.
Under your bill, what would the punishment be for anyone who is caught replicating a candidate with AI?
There is a financial penalty that's involved with that, and that is also something that under another bill, House Bill 1373, could also be charged criminally. And I think that's the important thing about these bills being done in conjunction with each other, is one deals with election code specifically, and the other one deals with the crime of impersonation. And I think using the two in tandem, hand in hand, it will be an effective deterrent in elections and in the public to prevent these things from happening.
Do you believe that there is a way that AI could be used for good in things like campaigns or the election process?
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at data entry and you look at things on the back end of campaigns, artificial intelligence can be used for a lot of good things. I think one of the things that is important to me personally is that it's not used to manipulate voters. If it's used as a tool that for something that humans are already doing in the process, then I think that that is perhaps more fair game. But if we're trying to actively and intentionally deceive people, if we're trying to manipulate votes, if we're trying to hack into election systems using artificial intelligence, obviously those are all out of bounds. And I think we should all agree, whether we're Republican or Democrat, that people want the truth and people want integrity in the elections. And that's what this bill does.
Your resolution to create a special panel to study AI was recently passed by the House State Government Committee. What are some of the goals for this committee?
The goals for this committee are to bring stakeholders together in government, private industry, the workers for government and the unions, and bring them together and say, how can we use artificial intelligence effectively? And also, what are some of the parameters that we need to put on artificial intelligence in not only state government, but in the laws that we make? So, for example, using artificial intelligence to replace workers is going to be a huge disruptor. We already know that this is going to happen. We've heard it from futurists. We've heard it from people in the technology industry. Artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of jobs. So then what do we do with those workers? That's something that we're going to have to deal with as government. The other thing that's important is making sure that artificial intelligence isn't used nefariously. So, for example, in the healthcare industry, using your data to raise your premiums because they know through artificial intelligence that you're a high risk for something. Those types of things, we have to make sure that we put the barriers on. Also, data manipulation, data accumulation, your personal data, there has to be a privacy component in there as well. These are some of the things that I'd like to see the Joint State Government Commission tackle and address in making proposals to us on how to effectively put guardrails on artificial intelligence.
Last question is, how can somebody tell what is AI and what's not?
Right now, the technology is still in its infancy, and there are some things that you can tell because the technology isn't there yet. So, for example, the lips might not match the eyes, or it might, the face might turn this way, but the lips don't turn as quick as the face. But it takes a detailed eye, and the technology is rapidly advancing. And so these things that you're able to see now with the naked eye, you might not be able to see in the future. And so that's why we're trying to get ahead of this. It's very important that people aren't deceived. That's why Rep. Paelli has the bill in that would label advertising that uses artificial intelligence as such, so that people are not deceived. It's a consumer protection.
Representative Bob Merski, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Here's a reminder about On the Issues this Wednesday. We'll have more candidates for you from next month's primary election. Rob McCurry, a Republican running for Congress in District 17, airs at 7 p.m. Then we shift our attention to 2 Democrats running for State Attorney General. Keir Bradford Gray is at 7:30 p.m. Then Jack Stolzheimer is at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. In the race for State Treasurer, we'll have Democrat Erin McClellan telling us about her campaign at 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.